What's up, everybody? Couch Mills here, coming at you with a brand new Valorant video. And in this video, we're going to be breaking down one huge mistake that separates low from high elo. And it's about exactly when to be aggressive and when your passivity is killing you. There's a lot we got to talk about in this video, so make sure you watch to the end. Go to the GameLeap website for in-depth tips and tricks, VOD reviews, and much more. But without further ado, let's jump into the video. And now, one of the most important things that you need to figure out through your time with becoming a good Valorant player is how you deal with passivity versus aggression, or what you are doing when you are playing a specific role on a site. A lot of times it's incredibly difficult to figure out what you need to be doing round after round, whether you need to be very passive, whether you should be lurking, whether you should be aggressively peeking. I know it can be incredibly difficult to find the correct thing because I'm sure that you've tried all these things at one point and all of them have worked at some points and didn't work at others, so you really don't know exactly what you should be doing round after round. And when a lot of things you learn to do based on how successful they are, when some things are successful some of the time and not others, you really don't know whether you should be aggressive on defense, passive, how you should be playing. Should you be riding in a corner? Should you be using your utility? How should you be playing? And that's what we're really going to be talking about in this video. Now, to better help understand this, let's actually break down what the jobs are of a defender holding a site. What are the things that you need to be accomplishing so that we can better help you have a plan for how to position, how to play, what to do, and we can basically help you figure out what is the best thing that you should do. Now, there are two primary jobs for any given defender. The first one is to gather information. Often you want to be hearing where an enemy is. You want to be gathering any information that is being shown. If enemies are using abilities on the site, if you see them or hear them running up, this is all important information that you can relay to your team for rotations, because at the end of the day, your goal is to hold a site, and having more information to your team is going to allow them to come assist you much easier. And the second big job of a defender is fighting for site control, or trying to hold site control as much as possible. Now, the reason that having site control is so damn important is when you have control of a space, the burden of discipline is on the person trying to take said space. And now, what do I mean by the burden of discipline? If I'm holding a corner on a site, the burden of the enemy specifically clearing that corner, or else I potentially can get 1, 2, or 3 free kills, that is incredibly high on their side, and it's only because I control the space currently. Now, if you just see the enemy come to your site, you give it up and you have to retake, while that is a viable strategy, you gotta understand that now the burden of discipline is on you as the defenders to retake the site, where an enemy can hide in any single corner, and it's very difficult when there are multiple corners that enemies could be in, and you can't effectively clear them at the same time. So more often than not, it's gonna be very difficult for you to do so, especially if you don't have a lot of utility. Now, we've acknowledged that you need to fight for site control, or that's one of your primary jobs, but you are at a fundamental disadvantage doing this often because of the lack of numbers versus against the enemy team. Like, if you are a single person holding onto a site and 5 enemy teams are running onto that site, you are at a pretty huge disadvantage because of all the angles that you have to cover for. Now, you can accomplish a lot of these jobs, the gathering information or the fighting for site control, without necessarily killing the enemy. You can stall them and use utility and things like that. But the fact of the matter remains, you are at a pretty big disadvantage. So the question goes back to, what should you be doing? Should you be staying on the back of the site and just waiting there for the enemy to come and put the burden on them to clear you back a site? Should you be lurking up and pushing the enemy team and maybe trying to get some kills before they even have chances to set up? Or should you be aggressively challenging them along sidelines, potentially getting a kill and running away? Now, unfortunately, these answers are not so clear-cut. I can't just give you the answer in any given situation because every single situation is different. That being said, there's certain things or mix-ups that you can do that will make holding site far easier for you because it puts more pressure on the enemy team. The first one is occasionally being proactive when you're on defense. Now, why would you occasionally want to challenge an enemy up close? Why would you occasionally want to be holding a close angle? What is the value in doing this, and why would you do this occasionally and not all the time? Well, here's the thing. While playing passive, it's definitely capable of getting you free kills. There is a way that if you play too passive, you are left with no options when enemy come to the point. For instance, let's say you're playing back-a-site on Haven A. You've always played back-a-site. You consistently play back-a-site. But if multiple enemies come on both sides of back-site A and they use utility to flush you out at the same time, you're gonna get pinched and you have nothing you can do. If they use good teamwork and utility, you basically die no matter what. Now, that being said, you don't want enemies to be able to save all the utility, go to the most passive place where you always play, and always invest the utility in that exact area, basically easily killing you. You want them instead to be constantly scared of you potentially being in any of the corners, whether it's aggressive or not. You want them to often be careful of you potentially challenging them when they're setting up in a short or a long. These are mix-ups that you can incorporate in your play that make it so enemies either have to be very careful, giving you more time to gather information and get that rotation off, or they have to use and invest utility earlier on different angles that you may or may not be in, which is going to make it a lot harder for them to just basically sandbag the utility for the very passive same place that you always seem to play. Now, I'm still telling you that you should be passive a pretty large percentage of the time, but occasionally intermingling aggression with that is going to put much more burden of discipline on those attackers. It's going to be easier for you to get kills off over time, especially as enemies adapt to your play and how you hold a certain site. They might be asking, okay, that tells me how I should hold a site and how I should mix up my aggression on site, but what about lurking? What about pushing the back line of an enemy? What is the value that I can get from that? What are the risks, and should I be doing it more often? Well, there's actually a pretty huge pro that you get when you push up very aggressively and lurk up. Like, let's say you're holding that A haven and no enemies are going. You hear them maybe pushing up C long, or they're fighting mid. You can effectively push up all the way to default. You could push up to the corners. You could push up to an angle, and you can get a lot more information about where enemies are rotating. This is something that even pro players will occasionally do, because the more and more you push up into the enemy backline, especially when you're clearing the own defaults of where you're holding the own areas, so like A long and A short, if you're pushing up on that haven example, you know that enemies aren't there, and that means it's far easier for you to predict where an enemy is going to hit. And remember, if you can get that information ahead of time, that one huge disadvantage you have, the one where you are going to be alone on a site as it's being executed, that can be mitigated, because if all of a sudden you could easily predict where an enemy is going to execute, and you have 2, 3, 4 people fighting them, and the enemy still has that burden of discipline, that burden of the attacker, it's going to be very difficult for them to win that fight at all, and that's what pushing up aggressively does for you. Now, that being said, what do you do if enemies start rotating back? You hear them. Oftentimes, it's really good to hide in a very aggressive angle, an angle that enemies are very unlikely to check, and you could potentially get multiple kills that way. That being said, something else that you can do is as enemies push up, you can actually aggressively take a duel and run away. One big problem I see often with players that really have a very surprising angle and a powerful surprise is they will get one kill and then they'll get greedy and they'll keep trying to fight an enemy team from behind them when the enemy team know that they're there. Oftentimes, you just need that one kill. You got that kill, which is gonna make it a lot easier for you to defend your site. You got information about where enemies are. You get that kill and you back off. Now, if enemies want to come clear the point, they still have to clear every single cubby, and they have to do it with less utility and less people. If you die though, now all of a sudden they know, hey, the person that was holding this site, he pushed up, that site is free, let's beeline to that site. And now, yes, you did get a kill, but the kill is supposed to make your job as a defender easier. But if you die, you're not doing your job as a defender at all anymore, because you gave up site control, which is going to make it very difficult for your team to retake. Essentially, trading 1 for 1 here, but giving enemies the information about what sites are clear and giving them site control is not worth what you're giving them, because you could have stalled a lot more not taking a direct fight on point, and you didn't have to trade 1 for 1 fighting an enemy here in their flank or on a lurk. Now, unfortunately, a huge other layer to this is going to be where you're specifically holding, what weapons you have, what characters you're playing. There's a lot of factors going into these questions, but if you want answers to those, you're going to have to go check them on the GameLeap website, where we have in-depth tips and tricks and VOD showing you step-by-step the decision-making made in the game, so you know exactly what you need to be doing. Aggressive, passivity, there's a lot you got to cover, so go check it out down there, or ask away in the comment section down below. Thank you so much for coming by. Hope you enjoyed the video. I love your faces, and I'll see you next time.